Hello, welcome to the video. In this video, I'm going to be reacting to a channel which I recently found. It's this channel called Whatifalthist, and it actually took me a moment to there. So this is a channel where this guy, he goes over all these historical things, and it could be, you know, everything from what if America went full colonial. Another 11 historical misconceptions. Is China the next world power? Top 10 countries that are hardest to conquer. And he does a pretty good job. A very good job, you know, comparatively to, anything that you'll get in the public schooling or anything that I've ever experienced as far as learning history. That he condenses a lot of information into these 20 to 30 minute videos. They're, incredibly interesting to watch. There's, from what I can tell, obviously everyone has their bias, but he makes a very good effort of being as unbiased and just as factual as he can be, you know, with the information that he has. Obviously you can hear his opinions on certain things, but it's a really incredible thing. So the name of the channel, it almost seems like, so he puts these videos together and like there's a mix of him narrating over graphs and charts and maps, and then over, text, and then sometimes on the text it'll be something will be misspelled or something, which can happen. We're all human. And so for it, I just found this channel yesterday, and it is incredible. Like, I almost think that a channel like this, with this kind of information, it can solve a lot of the world's ills, or at least put people, I don't know how you can go through watching any of these videos and then go back to kind of an echo chamber reality. Obviously you can believe whatever you want, but if you say that you're open-minded and that you want to at least take in information and make not assumptions but build the ideas about things, then I would definitely recommend watching this channel, because it's absolutely incredible the things that he goes through. And so I didn't know Whatifalthist. So it's all together. It's like one word. We could see it behind me over here. There it is. Where is it? Right there. Whatifalthist. And I thought it was like, what if all this, or maybe altist was a word, but it's really what if alternate history, which is great. So he's this young American guy, and he really breaks down these topics. So if I'm gonna get some cheap views off of reacting to a video, then I might as well be something like this. So definitely go watch his channel. I may try to make some jokes, some bad name jokes while watching this video, but I do it all with love, because this channel is amazing. I've learned more watching just a few of this guy's videos than I've probably learned in any history class ever. So the video that I was just watching, and I decided I would start this reaction series, is a video called The Top 11 Historical Misconceptions. And I left a comment on this video where I said, when you learn, let's see, I should decide myself when I'm trying to do this. So when you learn about the misconception and the reality at the same time. So it's only a misconception if you knew the misconception, and then you find out it's a misconception when you learn the reality. But when you don't even know the misconception, then you definitely don't know the reality. So this is a video where I would imagine a lot of people will learn both the misconception and the reality. Look at this. Sorry for number 3. I made a mistake, and left out the reason for why we look down upon the Middle Ages. The big reason is that modern Western civilization came out of the failings of the 14th century medieval civilization. Medieval civilization lasted longer than it probably should have, and thus collapsed spectacularly in the 14th century. Thus, since modern Western civilization was formed out of medieval civilization, we remember it as the most brutal and dysfunctional, and forget all the successes it had in the previous 500 years. Whew. This guy is in depth. The best source for number 3 is Age of Faith by Will Durant. So incredible. So, and a lot of what he harks back to is that, people like to blame a single individual or a corporation or a group of people on the world's ills, on the problems in the world, where really, while there's plenty of people that make self-interested decisions and selfish decisions and destructive decisions and destructive actions, that's what they are. They're individual actions, because the whole world, and what he comes up with this great line where the human race doesn't do anything. Individuals do things. And as individuals do things and discover things and change things and make things and destroy things, things change. And there may be reasons why they did it. There may be external, internal reasons, but that we may not ever understand. But it's more, saying that the human race has progressed is regressing or anything. That's a false statement. There's people that are living better lives. There's people that are living worse lives. There's people that are going to be living better lives. There's people that are going to be living worse lives, and that's just the way of the world. Now, the undeniable facts are that there are, as far as we can tell, I mean, maybe 100 million years ago, there was 10 billion humans that got wiped off the earth, or some other creature that was, it's not even just intelligent, but is both, has the power of, abstract reasoning and intelligence and the physiological tools to be able to manipulate the world. See, let's say dolphins have the same brain capacity as a human being. That's something that's very well, or elephants or any of these large mammals could very well have the same exact brain capacity, if not more, than human beings. But where they're limited is not having the physiological tools to be able to manipulate the world in which human beings do. So now, I'm not saying that they are or that they aren't. I don't know. I'm not a biologist. But you can't deny the fact that having, and I keep putting my hands up, having 5 fingers, 10 fingers, decimals that we have, we are able to manipulate the world and change the world and build things and build tools, imagine a dolphin building a tool. It can know how to build a tool. It can understand that it needs to build a tool, but how on earth would it go about it? I mean, it doesn't have the physiological ability to be able to do it. And by some stroke of luck and evolutionary, circumstance, we do, or at least we have enough to be able to manipulate the world to the extent which we have. So let's get started in this video and let's learn something. What's going on here? Is this gonna load? Oh, we got some ads. We got some ads. All right.
I've spent my life studying.
Okay, here we go.
I run a history show, and so it basically goes without saying. And this is unbelievably nerdy, but it's still true.
Books this guy's reading.
Once you spend enough time in the past and get better at understanding it, it's almost like a foreign country that you learn to like and respect. And so when people try to misconstrue the past, you feel somewhat upset and want to defend your friend. This is why this video exists. This video isn't meant to look at stuff where it's clearly some special interest group involved. Holocaust deniers will continue to deny the Holocaust since they hate Jews. The Turks will continue to deny the Armenian genocide. Indians will continue to hate on Churchill. This video looks at...
For each type of these, I will type out the reasons why I believe this misconception is popular and what it serves. I wanted to say it out loud, but that really extend the video. Some of these will be quite controversial. So this is kind of the format of the videos. He'll have these texts, and very often I'll have to pause it because there'll be so much text on the page that he'll cut away from it before I can read it. And there's just so much information. I mean, he crams so much information in these videos. It's like, bravo. So go support this channel because it's incredible.
stuff we get wrong in history without even thinking about it, although each of these feeds into a certain narcissism and prejudice inside our current society. These are all sort of controversial claims on my...
Oh, here we go. If you want a reading list, here you go. World at War, Brief History of Iceland, History of War of 100 Battles, The Medieval Soldier, Medieval Europe, Medieval World, Wars of Empire. Is that by the same guy? The Medieval Soldier, The Medieval Europe, Medieval World. Is that? No, it looks like it's somebody else. A Short History of the United States, The Long Summer, Scotland, Piracy, 15 Decisive Battles for the World. I mean, if you're going to read anything, I could definitely make a big argument towards reading non-fiction historical books, because, I mean, there's so much that has happened in the world, and I saw this in an interview, and it just made sense. Conan O'Brien, he was asked, what do you read? What do you like reading? And he's like, oh, well, I like to read nonfiction. And because I like to read nonfiction, because, there's so much that I would like to know about that actually happened. And, I mean, fiction, anyone can write fiction all day long and just make things up. But there's so much that is real, and what has actually happened, cliche enough, is stranger than fiction. I mean, the actual story of human beings throughout history, and the fact that I'm able to sit here in front of a webcam with HD footage and a microphone and an internet connection and this AI technology that I have green screening out the back of my room, which is not easy at all to do, because it's not, it just the technology for this video. I mean, you want to see what the back of this place looks like? Look at how good this technology has gotten for being able to key out the background that is not one solid color. Look at that. So that's how crazy technology is. Look, there's like no uniformity. There's a artwork behind there, there's TV, there's different colors, there's different, so if it's a little buggy, but I turn it on and boom, it's gone. So this is incredible. So it's an incredible time that we live in with incredible technology, and it's all been made by human beings, not the human race, but by individual human beings have created their strides for us to be able to, for me to be able to sit down and have this conversation. And I was having this conversation for an average person to be able to do this, because people like to think that in their previous lives they would have been one of the rulers or one of the nobility or one of the higher class, one of the great people in history. But more likely than not, if you were to have a previous life, you were more likely than not just another average peasant just trying to make it through life. There's a very, very slim, if you're not great in this life, there's very little, even if you were great in this life, even if you're great in Elon Musk was likely a peasant of sorts in a previous life. You know what I mean? Like some kind of slave that no one even bothered to execute in the town square. You know what I mean? So this is just the reality. So, now you may have had a big contribution. Maybe you supported a family of like 10, 11 kids, and you worked on a landowner's land the whole time, or whatever you did, and it did have an impact, because then those kids became the next kids. So we every human being has had an impact in one way or another, small or large. One way. Waves are made. I was reading another thing that was like the mind works in waves, and that you may get these waves of different thoughts or emotions, and it can be harrowing and horrifying and anxiety inducing and all these things. But once you get acclimated to the fact that the mind works in waves, you can let the waves just roll right over you. I guess is the point. So with that being the case, with everyone, being, every human being that's born is throwing another rock into a metaphorical body of water. The waves are going to ripple, and depending on where you throw it in the water and how it interacts and whatever's going on, those waves will interact with other waves, which may make big changes in the world. We don't know.
My part. So for each claim, I'm going to pick one or two books that are the best source to back me up.
Okay, cool.
So to start, number 11, that the commanders in World War I were idiots. You could say I made this list 11 rather than 10 to going over the top too much. At least here I'm facing internet comments and not machine guns. We sort of have this myth that much of the bloodshed of the battles like the Somme, Ypres, Verdun, etc. were caused by commanders that were completely out of touch with modern technology.
I didn't even know this was a misconception. I didn't even know that this is a misconception. This is how uninformed I am. I knew there was a lot of death in World War I. I didn't know it was thought to be because the commanders were idiots, but that is a funny misconception, that every World War I commander was just an inept, just like, I don't know. I've been doing war my whole life, but I don't know.
Incapable of changing their techniques. Cold-blooded killers who cared nothing for the piles of bodies they made. Cool. There's a couple important variables to keep in mind.
By the end of the American Civil War, the North had already developed the tactics Germany had ended up using at the end of World War I that caused the spring 1918 offensive to be so deadly. The fact that no European army decided to look to the American Civil War or Russo-Japanese War as a precedent should be counted against them.
First is that World War I was the first lengthy European war in 99 years,
wow.
And this was during the era of the greatest technological progress ever. Also, keep in mind this was the first war in which technological progress was an immediately apparent variable. Roughly,
I definitely make that argument. I was making that argument where in the history of warfare, those which have created and mastered a newer, better, more lethal, better in that it's more lethal technology. I mean, I guess you can measure the lethality of a technology based on, your ratio. How many people can one person kill using that technology? Like with a knife, a person that's really good with a knife may be able to kill a few dozen people also with knives. How many people can a person with a knife kill people without knives? I don't know. It depends on how good you are with the knife. How many people can a person with a pistol kill people without pistols? And then people with pistols. How many people can someone with a submachine gun kill versus people without submachine guns? So and then you just go through the list. How many people can one person or nation with a nuclear weapon kill versus someone without it? You know what I mean? So that kind of not easy formula to figure out, but simple formula can then, if Las Vegas betting houses, if Las Vegas, betting was going on before all these wars, or if people were making bets before these wars, which people were, it just may have worked out in a different way. People have always made bets, before wars that one side will win over another. Even the people that are within the war, you choose a side based on expecting that side to win and that side winning being better for you. I mean, that's the logical thing to do. Why would you pick a side and invest in a side to win that you don't expect to win, or if they do win, it would be worse for you? That doesn't make any sense.
Similar tactics like cavalry charges, musket firing lines, etc. had existed for hundreds or thousands of years, and this was the first major war that had fought dramatically different from that archetype. This was the first war where armies realized that changing a technology was something that had to happen in months rather than decades. Also, it was very unclear what changes would result in a breakthrough. The World War I generals
Now
tried a
I'm
huge
flipping
amount of things, whether poison gas,
Nice.
extraordinary amounts of artillery
Welcome to
fire,
the news.
blowing enormous craters in the
History
enemy line,
news.
infiltration tactics, attacking different geographic regions, and any of these could have broken the Western Front if things went well. No one knew the tank was the thing that would finally end trench
tank?
warfare. A big issue was that radio...
So the technology, thus now we'll feed this back into what I'm talking about. The technology of the tank was the tank that won the war. So one person in one tank was oh, look at this. I like this framing. One person in one tank was able to do a lot more damage than people that weren't in tanks. I mean, that would be a hard argument to argue against. Well, I think people with knives and muskets and bow and arrows would be a fair adversary for a tank. Imagine that round in like Mortal Kombat. Choose your weapon? A tank. Choose your weapon? A bow and arrow and a few stones. I mean, come on.
Was not advanced enough for an army of this era to coordinate offensives in the large regions that were being fought over, and the machine gun and barbed wire made the defensive unbelievably powerful. People often criticized leaders of this era for not ending the war with a peace before all the death, but this ignores the ugly truth the populations involved were unbelievably bloodthirsty.
Wow.
The start of the war was greeted with joy and excitement, while the massive casualties are seen as a justification for the war, since national honor demanded revenge and the burning of the enemy capital as retribution for your son's death. Any government that made a peace before the end would have collapsed,
that is true.
either due to losing...
That is true. Like, when you look back at a moment in time, I mean, you think, oh man, so much suffering. How could they do that? But when you're actually in the middle of it, I mean, it's just one of those things. Like, when you're actually in the middle of something, the most irrational, horrifying things can be rationalized. And this brings up the interesting argument of rationalization versus empiricism. And this is what he goes through, a lot of his videos go through, where the cultures and the societies that have really advanced have chosen empiricism over rationalization. And one of the big arguments that he argues against the philosopher Plato, saying that Plato, with his philosophy of forms, has set back, but it's set back, and probably has set us back, but set back the advancement of technology for 1,000 years. Imagine affecting the human race for 1,000 years. That is insane. So he says that, Plato made the argument that there's these forms, and since it's all, it's all form-based, and it's all predetermined. I know I'm butchering it, but in essence, he created the foundation for people to make the logical conclusion that studying the outside world was a waste of time. And he also makes and when I say he, I mean the creator of this channel, not Plato now, but Whatifalthist makes the argument that the Islam was able to advance so far because they studied the outside world, but then there was a shift where the logical, and it's amazing how much damage or good a logical conclusion can come to, where Islam then came to the conclusion that God made everything, and everything God wanted there to be there was in the Quran, so there was no need to study the outside world. You just need to study the Quran. And I know this is a very real thing, because there was a time I met someone who was Muslim or Islamic or whatever you call it, and he made the argument that if it's in the Quran, it's true, and if it isn't, it isn't. And this was a modern person about the same age. We've lived in the same world, and it's like, hey, what do you think about this? It's like, well, the Quran says this, so this is what I believe. It's like, yeah, but well, what about, this evidence that contradicts it? Well, the Quran says this about that, so it's not the case. So there really is this kind of fundamental, now this may not be everyone, but this is definitely a case, and, in the history, I'm not the history buff, I'm just going off what I've learned, and it's interesting how these logical conclusions can come to be. And one of them being that everything that needs to be known is already in the Quran, so there's no need to go look outside. Whereas now Christianity had its own problem. They were then doing kind of a similar thing. I don't know, I have to fill that in. But then at some point they came to the logical conclusion that God made the world and everything's out in the world. So to study God and to admire God or to worship God, whatever it is, to understand God, it would be, you need to understand the world and study the world. And then that's where the Renaissance and the all the technology and things that came out of those societies came from, was from this logical conclusion from a religious text. So it was like, okay, so what's the point of the whole religion? Well, God made the world, God made everything around us, so thus we should study the world and how it works and empirically study it and experiment with it, and based on that we'll understand God more. And that was really the point. It's not like, oh, we're going to be able to learn how to split the atom. It's like, no, by studying the outside world we'll be able to learn how God works, because God made the world. The reason for the myth. People feel the need for a scapegoat. Just saying that a war started during a real bad juncture in military technological progress that favored the defensive, while Europe was going through an immense demographic youth bulge that created lots of aggression and energy, isn't very comforting to the millions who suffered in the war. Similarly, after the war, when the adrenaline ran off, people didn't want to admit that they were part of the collective madness of bloodthirstiness that let the war happen. It was easier on both accounts just to blame the leadership. It's always easier just to blame someone. And this is one of the themes that permeates through a lot of these videos, where it's easier to blame an outside force and to attack an outside force than it is to look into yourself, and yourself being whether it's a nation, a people, or whatever it is, to actually see what those problems are and try to sort them out.
Or revolution. Number 10, Oriental despotism. There's this tendency to view the states coming out of the Middle East as some sort of big red blob that wash over Europe and fight some battle like Salamis, Vienna, Constantinople, or Tours, and then return to their lairs, normally with hordes of peasants being whipped into human waves. In fact, many of the Middle Eastern empires were immensely subtle regimes that could be very nice places to live. The Persian Empire that fought the Greeks was a very tolerant, wealthy, well-run
misconception. I mean, it's even something that's seen now, where you see something on the news. So just recently, it was spring break, and I live down here in Miami, and there's these images of just chaos in the streets, and Miami Beach was just chaos on the street, and the police had to show up, and anywhere near Miami Beach, you were just gonna be just getting engulfed in chaos. And while the reality of it was that, sure, there was pockets of chaos, there's pockets of places where there was police and maybe some raunchy activity, but all in all, probably 99% of Miami Beach was business as usual. Maybe there's some extra traffic, maybe there's some extra things, but everything in history, because again, there's the way human beings perceive things, with the limited information, it's kind of how you're doing these false equivalencies in your mind, it's really because it's the only thing that we can go off of. Our entire existence is such a fractional sliver of the universe and reality that we'll take a grain of sand and just assume every grain of sand on the face of the earth is exactly like that grain of sand. Where if you actually look at sand, sand under a microscope, sand under a microscope is like this. Sand under a microscope is a collection of just incredible things. I mean, the variation of things in sand is absolutely incredible. But from the surface, it all looks like just the same uniform thing. But when you actually look closely enough, everything has its own unique identity. Everything has its own shape and form. And I mean, it's incredible. Look at some of these things. Images of sand grains through a microscope. I mean, just look at it. Almost seems like implausible. How is that really sand under a microscope? 300 times. Sand under a microscope. So sand under a microscope is just an incredible array. This is what sand... Is that really what sand under a microscope? This is how sand looks under a microscope. Comparing something to a grain of sand is usually supposed to mean that it's small, but Dr. Gary, microscope photography, turned the stereotype on his head. So this is analogous to history, where it looks like, oh, okay, this is what a grain of sand is. This is what all the grain of sand is. It's like, this is what one little part of civilization is. That's what the entire civilization was for hundreds of years. And it's like, that's such a cop-out way to be able to describe a people, a nation, a period in history, when it's really, even at its smallest level, and the smallest level of, human history is the individual. And that individual is so diverse and complex. And, it's that saying of, you can predict what large groups of people will do. So this is how we would need to look at history and at really any event. And it's the hard thing to do, and it's nearly impossible because no one has enough time. Just figuring out our own lives and the moments that we have is nearly impossible. So to be able to try to figure out what even one other we don't even know what our partner sleeping next to us, we don't even know a fraction of what their life is about. So how in the world could we expect to understand and be able to explain what people long ago were doing, what people are doing now? So there's no way. So you have to be completely open-minded and just be able to take in the information and to be able to reason with it. And if you want to take that information in and be able to get a better understanding and develop a better understanding, but there's no guarantees. And let's go back to the video.
Developed state. By every metric except intellectual ferment, the Persian Empire would be the first world, and the Greeks were a second world backwater. There were many equally pleasant, humane Middle Eastern regimes like the Abbasids, Umayyads, and Parthians. In the 16th century,
yeah, that's another thing too that you look at, and he's gonna get to that misconception where, because I guess there's it's just like there is now. There's a vocal minority, right? Where it seems like there's a majority position, but really it's a position of a vocal minority of people that is the same with how we look at historical things. Like you'll see torture devices and people that are doing public executions and all these things. And while that probably happened way more than it happens in modern times, it wasn't all the time. I mean, there's plenty of evidence from ancient writings and things where people, for the most part, for most of their lives, just live, I wouldn't say similar, but we're worried about the similar things that people are worried about now. Where their family's going to live, what their family's going to eat, what their children are doing, their job, their income. Those are things that people have been worried about forever. And I mean, how they worry about it and how they go about doing it may have adapted, but the concerns have remained the same. Their survivability, the survivability of their family, their prestige in society. And one of the things that he comes to break down in these videos, which I never really thought about, I'd heard about, is that societies can be divvied up into guilt-based societies and shame-based societies. And I'd heard rumblings about this based on how Japanese society functions, where you want to save face, and if you do something that's shameful or not looked upon good by the community, that you'll be ostracized from the community, and that'll be like the most, a fate worse than death. And this is... Then there's the guilt-based societies where you won't have the shame put upon you, but you'll kind of put that onto yourself. Where if you don't feel like you're reaching your highest potential, your highest ideal, that you don't need the society. The society may or may not, shame you, but it's really that everybody's going through their own guilt of doing something or not doing something. And this is very prominent, definitely, in Roman Catholicism, where you'll hear plenty of people talking about how guilt has driven them to do different things and live their life.
You could easily claim that the prosperous, fairly tolerant, relatively free, and vast Ottoman Empire would be the best place in the world to live. Meanwhile, Western Europe was going through internal strife, religious war, and witch burnings. Similarly, Islam in the early Middle Ages was the most technologically advanced area in the world. The Islamic world, even though having a much less scientific worldview than the West,
more ads.
Enlisted is the free, brand new online World War II shooter. Command a squad.
Enlisted. I wonder if the U.S. Army...
A lot of soldiers then participate.
Video game.
Had rough technological parity until around 1700. These Near Eastern empires are often viewed as static blobs, but nothing could be further from the truth. Number 9. Dialogue. This is sort of different from the rest of the list in that most of it comes with our portrayals of the past in stuff like TV, literature, and video games. The way people in the past talk and socially interact is very off. The big thing to consider is that people in the past lived in social hierarchies that were way more steep than what we have today. In portrayals of the past, class is never looked at. In most historic societies, social superiors were slavishly praised and never corrected, while inferiors are treated with immense condescension or just flat-out rudeness. Classes could interact with each other, but their roles were quite prescribed. Also, we ignore stuff that was very important to people in many pre-modern cultures, such as religion and honor. A big reason for this is the current cultural powerhouse of the world is the United States, which in history is very much the exception by having an incredibly weak class structure. Similarly, American English is the most direct style of talking there is in the world.
This is fascinating. I wanted to stop here. So they compare U.S. English, France, and Thailand. Thailandese. What's the language of Thailand? And they compare it through context, feedback, egalitarian, hierarchical, deciding. So communicating, evaluating, leading, deciding, trusting, disagreeing, and scheduling. So Thailand is very high context, very high indirect negative feedback, very hierarchical, very top-down, very relationship-based, avoids confrontation, and somethingable time. Whereas U.S. English is very low context, somewhere in the middle for feedback, somewhat egalitarian, more so top-down. I wonder what's a consensual language. Trust-based, relationship-based, confrontational. I love how French is super confrontational. And scheduling, it's somewhere definitely leaning towards linear time. Okay, that's cool.
World. Read Victorian or Georgian novels and see the way they talk. Much more is conveyed by insinuation and subtlety rather than directly. You see similar stuff in a lot of world culture.
The goal of Western culture is to discover knowledge. The goal of Chinese culture is to have stable, harmonious relationships between people. Western rules value clarity and efficiency. Chinese value harmony and politeness. Try not to disagree openly. Don't ask people who is senior than you difficult questions. Communicate negatives in an indirect way. Don't do anything to disturb the harmony. Being polite rather than clear.
Today like China or Mexico that have stronger class structures and more recent industrialization. Similarly, swearing is really off. People swear way too much and incorrectly.
When medieval nobles trained to be very polite from childhood swear more than Philly. That's bad writing. I used to live in Philadelphia, one of the cruder cities in America, and when medieval nobles trained to be very polite from childhood swear more than Philly. So if people are in a movie and they're like F this, they're effing and jeffing all over the place, that's not, according to this guy and what he's read, is not factual.
Fuck and shit were not swear words in the Middle Ages. In societies with no privacy, they couldn't afford it. Instead, stuff like God's bones was, and in Quebecois French, you still swear by naming articles in a church like tabernacle. Similarly, people really swore much less before 40 years ago, and so putting casual swearing in a genteel environment in the 1920s just isn't plausible. Another sort of related...
Like, people just stop saying fuck.
Fuck and shit were not swear words in the Middle Ages. In societies with no privacy, they couldn't afford it. Instead, stuff like God's bones was, and in Quebecois French, you still swear by naming articles in a church like tabernacle. Similarly, people really swore...
Look at that. So, people were effing and jeffing all the time from 1600 to 1800, and then they just stopped. People stopped effing and jeffing from like 1825 till 1960. That's crazy. Nobody effed and jeffed one time for like
much less
100, near 100 years, 120 years.
40 years ago, and so putting casual swearing in a genteel environment in the 1920s just isn't plausible. Another sort of related interesting thing is accent. I speak two languages, French and English. In period pieces, both languages get accent wrong. Before the 19th century, British English had a hard R and sounded like a combination of a pirate and an American accent, but for the royalty and nobility, more like a southern plantation accent.
The best sources. The reason for the myth. Number one, the United States is the current cultural hegemon, a country for which many reasons is completely bizarre by historic standards, which creates an enormous cultural barrier between the people making most of the stuff and the societies involved. Stuff like religion, honor, and class is deeply unpleasant for our era of history to talk about, but was considered absolutely vital for most societies in history. Hollywood and the entertainment industry in general reads practically no history, and being historically accurate does not immediately lead to sales. Definitely. They just don't give a fuck. It's like, hey, that never happened or would have any effect, but I have this cool scene idea. I have this really cool set piece that I think is going to make this a really cool movie. But it would never even cross people of that time mind for it to happen. But it's going to be really cool. This is like one of those pitch meetings.
The earlier French accent is much closer to French Canadian than a modern Parisian one. I could go on, but I'm sure you get the point. Number 8, the people in the past were stupid and immoral. No one will directly say this, but it exists in a lot of assumptions we have in our society. We assume that people in the past were dumb for believing in demons or cruel for having brutal public punishments. We blame one historical...
Hey, no one's dumb that's able to survive through really any time in history. But, like, this is probably the first time in history, the last like 40, 50 years, where you could be really dumb and still be able to live and pass on your genes. That doesn't mean there weren't stupid people before, but you had to have some kind of intelligence. Even if you were illiterate, just completely illiterate, you had to have some kind of intelligence to just be able to survive. And if you're able to breed... And those children were able to make it, like if you're able to breed 2 generations down, if you're able to breed and then your offspring were able to breed, you had some kind of intelligence.
Figure or another for not coming up to our current moral standards. It would take thousands of pages for me to go through every example, but let me get through the ones I just mentioned and one more. Ancient peoples believed evil spirits could infect food and parts of the natural world, and once an evil spirit infected someone, their mind or body would...
Imagine if COVID happened and we just thought it was an evil demon, and instead of vaccines and all that shit, we had exorcisms to remove COVID from people. Like, that was like a hot thing. It's like, oh, got the COVID. Well, go schedule your exorcism because you done got the demons. You done got the demons.
Weekend. When you realize that you could get evil spirits out of fruit by cooking it, you realize this is a society struggling to understand disease without the technology to see germs. Similarly, when you don't have the ability to get medicine that can help, the placebo of magical medicine does actually statistically help.
That's a good thing to do. Like, that should be put into law. Like, before there's a drug for something, just release a placebo. Like, they probably could have helped the COVID situation if in April 2020 they're like, folks, we got it, we got the magic COVID drug, and it was just straight up a placebo. It was just a sugar pill, but you tell people this is the magic COVID cure, this is it, we found it, folks.
Similarly, in medieval societies which had very high crime and murder rates and which didn't have the resources to...
What is long-term homicide rates across a select number of countries or regional groups? I love how somewhere it said that the first murder in the United States was like in the 1800s. Murder's been going on forever. There's been murder forever. Look at this. Italy was just straight up murdering people left, right, and center. Homicides per 100,000. Italy in like right before the 1500s was just straight up, everybody was murdering everybody. But even by that static, not that many people were getting murdered. Even at its peak in history, 70 something people out of every 100,000 is not a lot of people to get murdered. And we're down in like less than 10. We're like 1 or 2 people every 100,000. So we are empirically in one of the safest times to never get murdered. But you would never know that by all the murder shows that are out there. See, maybe because it's so rare, people are like, there's just not enough murder. I need to go watch some murder on TV. I need to go watch Dexter and CSI and Law and Order and every murder show, because there's just so little murder. There's just so... This video is going to get flagged every which way. So subscribe to the channel. Like the video, because I've said all the taboo words in this video.
Maintained jails and had precious little law enforcement. The law was enforced by brutal punishments to those...
Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. Imagine it's like, what are you going to go do today? Well, I'm going to go into the center of town and watch someone get pulled apart by horses. Oh. And look, they have this guy with the axe. It's not bad enough that there's 4-ton horses. There's literally probably like 8,000 pounds ripping this man apart. You need this guy with this axe. It's bigger than his head.
Those they happen to catch to make as good an incentive as possible against crime. Finally, it's easy to criticize pre-modern society.
That guy stole a Kit Kat bar. That guy stole a Twix bar.
Societies for their massive inequality, sexism, steep class divisions, systems of...
Look at this. Look at this ghoul-looking dude. Ooh. Some of these people are looking rough. Some of these people are having a bad hair day, man. I think I'm having a bad hair day. Look at this guy. This guy right here is looking rough. Look at this guy. This guy's the time traveler. He's like, oops, I jumped into the wrong time. This is like Doctor Who showing up and be like, whoa. I love how Doctor Who's been going on for like 40 years when he's entered all these like crazy times in history where he would most definitely be dead. Most definitely.
of bondage like slavery or serfdom until you realize that every single...
Here's one of these slides where there's so much text. I'm not trying to morally cop out here and say everything that happened in the past is okay. Degree really matters here. Even the areas that were really good by their era standards are deeply problematic by ours. For example, in the hyper-violent, muscle-driven societies without good birth control, and in which childbirth was often deadly, that made up the world before 1800, men did in fact have many biological advantages over women. This is why every single pre-modern society was deeply sexist. However, the degree of variation was enormous. In 1600, in Western Europe, a woman could be a monarch, often divorce her husband, own property, run a business or estate, get an education, etc. Meanwhile, at the same time in the Islamic world, an upper or middle class woman could never leave the house, could only visit her relatives once a year, was forbidden from doing nearly any work, and often faced horrifying genital mutilation. Jesus. Similarly, although every pre-modern society had some form of bondage, one can compare, even in colonial Virginia, the voluntary 7-year indentured servitude that predominated in the mid-17th century versus the mass forced slavery of millions of Africans in the 18th.
Advanced society in pre-modern times had them to a differing degree, and then you start to realize that it was probably necessary for them to function. When your average individual productivity is super low, you need to oppress a lot of people to accomplish anything important. Similarly, in a world where the only power is muscle, slavery or serfdom is the way to accomplish necessary yet unpleasant tasks. This type of thinking is a rabbit hole that...
The reason for the myth: people are naturally narcissistic. We're so far removed from what life is like in pre-industrial societies that it's often hard to even understand what their lives were like. Saying our ancestors were dumb or evil is a way of not having to compare ourselves with their accomplishments. If you say that all 19th century Americans were stupid or evil, there's no need to question if we as a society would be brave enough to sacrifice 300,000 lives to end slavery. Yeah, us as modern people have accomplished so little compared to ancient people against the odds that they had to compete with.
I can go on forever. I recommend you check out the book Foragers, Farmers, and Fossil Fuels, which is a really good summary of this. Number 7. Industrialization was awful.
This was a misconception?
There's sort of this belief that the early stages of industrialization were that of horrifying exploitation, in which factory workers toiled for 16-hour days in terrible conditions while the owners...
I'm gonna preempt this. I'm going to assume that toiling in a factory may be on par with toiling in a field and doing everything manually, but I would imagine that definitely the overall good was better. People were toiling anyways. The jobs were different. The roles were different. Were they less horrifying? I wasn't there. I'm making a YouTube video in an air-conditioned room. I can't fucking tell you.
Grew rich. There's some element of truth to this, although in many circumstances, the worst conditions are cherry-picked for political agendas. However, industrialization was much better than what came before it. There's this really interesting part of the 1854 Elizabeth Gaskell novel, North and South, where our lead character is visiting the home of a North English working-class family and sees they live much better than the rural South English peasantry. Being able to eat meat every day and having good furniture while only working 10-hour days. Similar to China, where people will literally illegally...
China has a bizarre system where internal migration is illegal. So most of the inhabitants of these cities are illegal aliens. That's crazy.
Migrate to the big cities in order to work 12
That's crazy. That's like if I go from Miami to Atlanta and I'm an illegal alien in Atlanta. That would be crazy. Or I go to New York City and I'm now an illegal, these Miami illegal immigrants.
Hour days and terrible housing just to get away from the fields. We tend to glorify traditional agriculture, but it's really horrifyingly bad. People work themselves from sunup till sundown until their backs break, while worrying about putting food on the table with each harvest. This is why wherever industrialization has occurred, people have fled en masse to the cities to work in the factories. However, on the other hand, a big factor people tend to miss out industrialization is the psychological stress. Cases of insanity skyrocketed in 19th century Britain to unprecedented levels as the traditional village life of millennials.
The reason for this myth. Marxists need to make 19th century industrialism look terrible to justify their existence, because if it wasn't, that would just make them whiners. Similar processes occur with the demonization of Tsar's Russia, Batista's Cuba, and Chiang Kai-shek, all of which were significantly more benign than the communist regimes that came afterwards. A certain percentage of the population will always distrust technological progress, and always has. I agree. Although this book is fiction, it's the best summary of industrialization I know. It's written like an anthropological study comparing the agrarian south of England versus the industrializing north. It was written by a contemporary person who actually lived in both regions at the time. See, there's a good place to read fiction. If the fiction was written by someone in a historical time that you're trying to study, that would probably be a good reason to read fiction, because now you're reading in between the lines. You're reading. Look at that. Look at this chair. My chair has no lumbar support. You're reading in between the lines. Oh, little announcement. So I'm going to be putting my Patreon link and Instagram link. I don't know why. I have nothing really fucking going on that Instagram. But I'm going to be putting those links because that seems to be a thing that people do. If you somehow like this content, then, become a patron, and I'll make content just for you. I can't wait for the first patron. I'm gonna make a video for the first patron. Do you want to be the first patron? Do you want to be? You have first movers advantage.
Got tore apart in a generation.
Imagine the special video that you're
Similarly, China is currently experiencing their version of the Roaring Twenties to deal with the side effects of their industrialization. Number 6. The Europeans exploited Africa.
I know about that misconception.
Boy, this one's going to be controversial. Ooh. There's this mistaken belief that the Europeans went into Africa, raped the continent, and then left. If we're counting the Atlantic slave trade, that's true, but I'm referring here to the European colonization of Africa in the late 19th and 20th centuries, which was a very different situation. Just look at Britain's investments at the turn of the 20th century. 40% were in Britain itself. Another 45% were in the USA, South America, and continental Europe, with France being the biggest trade partner. Only around 15% were in the actual British Empire, of which the White Dominions and India were the biggest partners. Meanwhile, Africa made up less than 2%. Nearly every African colony cost the Europeans...
Wow, look at that poster. Highways of Empire. Buy empire goods from home and overseas. Very interesting. Imagine that being the map of like your empire. That's wild.
Far more than they got out of it. The Europeans didn't even colonize Africa for money. The Industrial Revolution created such a technological barrier, and the Europeans in general just bribed local chieftains, that the Europeans colonized Africa mostly for pride. The French did it to get some pride after the Franco-Prussian War. The British were worried the French would get too powerful, so got involved. And then the Germans and Italians didn't want to be left out. The Europeans got a lot of flack for having most of their...
What are you doing? What are you doing over there? Oh, nothing. Looks like you're going to Africa. No, not going in. Yeah, looks like you're going to Africa. No, we're not going to Africa. I think you're going to Africa. No. Yeah, you're going to Africa. You're in Africa, aren't you? We're gonna go to Africa too. We're gonna go. We'll just go together. Let's just go together. Why don't let's just go? No, nothing's going on here. What are you talking about?
African budgets being in military and administration, but remember, in most of Africa there was no pre-existing state apparatus, and without a functioning state, education and health really don't matter. However, Europe invested far more into Africa than it ever got out, which it's difficult to describe as exploitation. I'm not saying the Europeans were good guys. They were brutally racist and often cruel. They would have exploited Africa if they could, but there really wasn't enough to steal to offset the costs involved.
This is not worth it.
I'm not even sure how much...
Imagine being a hostage in a bank robbery. And then the and they just beat the shit out of you, and they're just abusing the hostages, and then they're just like, there's not even that much money in the safe. This is not even, it's not worth it. So it's just, and then the hostages, they start liking it. They're like, why don't you stay? We're having a good time. And like, no, this isn't worth our time. We're out of here.
Much effect the Europeans themselves had on Africa. For the 60 years they were there, by the time the Europeans decolonized the average African colony...
Imagine going on vacation for 60 years. Going on a 60-year sabbatical. What are you doing? I'm going on a sabbatical. When do you expect to be back? 60 years time? 60 years time. 60.
Colony, it had about 10,000 Europeans, and 60% of the continent was still animist. The Europeans worked through local African...
The reason for the myth. The uneducated tend to view wealth as a zero-sum game by which one can only be wealthy from taking from someone else's, and one is poor since someone took theirs. Thus, it follows that the richer region in the world... Europe is rich since it exploited the poorest, Africa. They fail to understand that the immense poverty is the natural state of man. In reality, Europe is rich and Africa is not, since geographic and historical factors incentivize Europe to create institutions that create wealth, which never occurred in Africa. Africa and Europe are rich and poor for reasons that have little to do with the other.
Elites whenever possible. Very few Africans saw European, were involved in the European economic system, or saw the printed word before 1950. Number 5.
Wow.
Early civilizations were good places. I feel like everyone when they're 13 gets fed the diet of school education talking about ancient Egypt and Sumer. We always get this sort of pleasant view of them. We're never told these were absolutely terrible places to live. I talk a lot in this show about how frontier societies can...
There are only 2 other people. I need to get them to work for me so I can get a nice house at all costs. Free seller society. Only 2 other people. I can do whatever I want and no one will tell me no.
Either develop towards servitude or freedom. The early civilizations were very much frontier servitude societies. Civilization wasn't formed willingly in the greater Middle East. Instead, a drying climate combined with high population density demanded cooperation over irrigation to survive. Control over the irrigation canals meant that leaders could just cut off the water to dissenters, so freedom was a joke. All the regimes involved tried to maintain control over their populations to maintain their irrigation canals, which was brutal work. Egypt was a caste society. Sumer was a slave one. Many of Sumer's wars were fought explicitly to gain slaves, which were about 20% of the population. By the end of the Babylonian Empire, 3/4 of the population were slaves. Many of the walls in this region existed to keep the population in rather than barbarians out. India's caste system was formed in this era for similar reasons. Similarly, these early civilizations were terribly weak. Mesopotamia was more often than not ruled by some foreign barbarian dynasty, while Middle Kingdom Egypt was defeated by barbarians who used bronze weapons and the bow and arrow. Barbarians had better lives and were better fighters. Similarly, these early civilizations get a lot of credit for inventing things, but remember, they had 4,000 years to do it, and a lot of the inventions we attribute to Egypt and Sumer were really
reasons for the myth. The less we know about a society, the more we glorify it. We've seen this with the Minoans, Mayans, and Indus Valley civilizations, which have been seen as peaceful, technologically advanced panaceas. I think it's panaceas. We're part. Let's just look it up. That's why we're doing this video.
Panacea.
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 Oh, thank you, Google. Cool. So,
invented elsewhere. For example, bronze and iron working were invented in the Caucasus, and the wheel was invented in
the process of urban agricultural civilization. We like to glorify the people who started the process.
Modern-day Ukraine. Number 4, the Dark Ages were really terrible. We treat the fall of Rome like it's a bad thing, but by the empire fell, it was a parasitic, authoritarian organization. In fact, in North Africa, England, and France, the standard of living and quality of goods actually rose under the barbarians. After the fall of Rome, urbanization and construction collapsed in Western Europe. We view this as a bad thing since we don't understand the Roman Empire was trying to support an urban civilization despite a level of agricultural productivity that simply shouldn't have been supporting it in Western Europe. So when Rome stopped making the administrative and social incentives for cities, they just went away. This was actually better for the average peasant who stopped having an absentee landlord to tell them what to do and take taxes. The healthiest and tallest people, alongside probably the freest in Europe between the birth of Christ and the Industrial Revolution, were in the centuries after the fall of Rome. Actually, in per capita income, in the worst years of the Dark Ages, the average Western European was only 7% poorer than a Chinese, which was the wealthiest civilization in the world. However, the good plows that could till Northern Europe's soil were not invented yet, so the population density inside Western Europe was tiny. So for individuals it was pretty good, but the collective European civilization did not progress much. Number 3. The Middle Ages were primitive. People confuse the Dark Ages and Middle Ages a lot, which is just dumb. In the Dark Ages around 700, Europe was a backwater. Well, by the time we hit the Black Death in 1336, Europe might have been the most developed area in the world. In the Dark Ages, Europe was making wooden huts. In the Middle Ages, Gothic cathedrals. We have a very biased view of the Middle Ages, viewing it as some horrifying primitive shithole. Let me just list some surprisingly modern things that existed in the Middle Ages. A banking system.
Banking industry run by Italians, especially Lombards. One of the first financial crashes in European history was when the King of England refused to honor his debts and thus blew up the Italian financial system. Government fiscal policies. Everyone was trying to purposely inflate the currencies in the 13th century. Paper checks used by the Templars to transport money to the Holy Land. Universities. Bologna. Oxford, Paris, etc. Intellectual debate. Look up Abelard's debate. The rationality versus irrationality debate about the nature of God is probably one of the most important events in history. Stock market in Italy. People would invest in ships and get a percentage of the proceeds. Government bureaucracies pioneered by the French used to unify the country. Thank you, French. Historians, too many for me to count. Flying machine. 11th century English priest Elmer of Malmesbury designed a gliding contraption. Publishing industry. There was a successful leisure reading movement by the 14th century with novels published just for pleasure reading. Public atheism. The University of Bologna was known for as such. Imagine today in the modern day having a degree from the University of Bologna. Is this a joke? Is this a joke? No, it's not a joke. I went to the very prestigious University of Bologna. It's been around since like the 1400s. The University of Bologna. Get the fuck out of here. There was a public atheism. So the University of Bologna. I should go get a degree from the University
Governmental
of Bologna.
fiscal policies, paper checks, universities, intellectual debate, a stock market, government bureaucracies, a publishing industry, historians, flying machines, and public atheism. We view the Middle Ages as some stagnant pool of regression, but by every metric, and as I said before in this show, medieval Christendom was one of the most inventive societies ever. From 1100 to 1300, Europe saw immense advances in naval, military, medical, literature. Medieval Christendom was Europe's...
Oh, look at this guy. It went from this shit to this guy looking... Did they also invent these poses? This guy's like ready to go. This guy is ready to go. Whatever comes, comes snow, hail, sleet, rain, snow. This guy is ready to go. He's like, fuck y'all. I'm aerodynamic too. Shoot me out of a cannon.
Saw immense advances in naval, military, medical, literary, political, philosophic, mechanical, demographic, and architectural.
That population drop is intense. People were just dropping like flies.
Fields. Compared to any civilization except the modern West, medieval Europe abounded in creativity. Another thing, before the Black Death, the Catholic Church took the line that bathing was healthy and should be done daily, and that belief in witchcraft was a superstition that marked you out as a fool. Funnily, as Europe left the Middle Ages and entered the Renaissance, bathing declined while belief in witchcraft grew. Number 2, migrations never occurred. This is a strange belief in modern archaeology. Whenever they see a change in culture in the archaeology, it's just naturally assumed to be a peaceful shift in culture rather than a migration or invasion. I always found this a bit strange since recorded history is filled to the brim with both. Genetics has really ripped this theory apart. Genetics has shown that massive migrations and shifts have taken place in history, especially before written records. Entire races have been wiped off the face of the earth. Africa south of Cameroon, South and East Asia, Central Asia, Europe, and parts of the Americas were all inhabited by people 10,000 years ago that have practically no descendants now. This is why the inhabitants of Britain and Scandinavia 9,000 years ago had dark skin from looking at genetics, or why you see very European-looking North Americans from the same era, since those races are just gone now. The modern inhabitants of Northern Europe, for example, came mostly out of Central Asia around 5,000 years ago, committing genocide against the previous inhabitants. You see similarly shocking results in historic times. The population of England is likely 40% Germanic, since a small group of Saxon males killed off the native Celtic male population and married the females. Similarly, few of the indigenous inhabitants of the Balkans or Eastern Europe were left after the Slavs arrived.
Imagine that. You thought your wedding was awkward. You thought having your in-laws having to meet, you thought that was awkward. Imagine one of those marriages. Imagine the toast at that wedding.
It gets even crazier the further you go back into history, where it suggests that humans aren't even entirely from Africa, having moved several times between Africa and Asia. Well, at least 2 whole new human species.
The previous correct 19th century paradigm that migrations and genocides were common in history was used as a justification for colonialism and the Nazis. Post-World War II academia thus became allergic to the theory and did everything it could to avoid it, even if it verged upon ridiculous at times. Lots of political causes and dependent upon people in the land they're currently living since time immemorial are dependent upon people being in the land. See, this is one of those misspellings. Think of how much it would damage Macedonian or Native American political causes if it turned out they were just a fairly recent group of invaders with no more claim to the land than anyone else.
Have been discovered just due to evidence of them breeding with us in our genomes. Number 1. The Native Americans were hippies.
I think I heard someone. The Conjuring, rated R.
Perfectly timed.
Wait, before you scroll away, you need to hear this.
No, I don't.
Republicans across the country are moving.
There's this misconception that the Native Americans were inherently peaceful and in tune with nature. This is wrong on practically every level. Furthermore, there's this belief that native warfare was mostly ceremonial, which is wrong again. Firstly, on the war section, native peoples killed each other like any other group, and actually had much higher deaths in war as a percent of the population than any European nation. The Iroquois committed genocide against the entire upper Midwest, depopulating a region stretching from Pennsylvania to Missouri. Archaeology suggests the urban Mississippians were fighting a losing war against the tribes of the Great Plains in the late Middle Ages, with evidence of burned cities and massacres. The Aztecs institutionalized wars with their subject states just to collect captives for the 2 million they sacrificed for their gods. Something else people often forget is that even in what would become the United States, the Native Americans weren't all forest tribes. You had some very developed urban societies. On the environmental front, the natives were actually worse than the Europeans, since the Europeans could rely on a wider range of crops and animals that prevented the land from being overused. Both the Aztec and Inca empires were facing environmental degradation to a certain degree. The American southwestern mountains used to be covered in trees, but the local Pueblo peoples deforested them. In the eastern United States, the natives purposely manipulated and burned the environment to make it as fertile as possible. I'm not trying to justify the European colonization here, but I want to make clear that the Native Americans.
After the arrival of the Europeans, plagues hit the native peoples that wiped out 90% of the population, thus creating inaccurate pictures of what Native American society was like before the Europeans. There has been a strong self-loathing strand in Western thought since World War I, which is manifested in glorifying the Native Americans. There are so few Native Americans left in North America that it has been convenient to use them as a symbol for whatever cause you believe in rather than as actual individuals, which they would be if they were a larger group.
Americans were people like any other, subject to the same flaws and good traits as anyone else, not in some special moral category. Well, that's it. If you enjoyed that video, please like.
So, that was an incredible video. I learned a lot, and this is just one of many videos that are on this channel. Definitely check it out and support them or do whatever, because you're going to definitely learn a lot. And I think the conclusion that we can take from this video is no one's innocent. There are no virtuous groups. There's just groups that have gone in and out, over a long enough period of time. Things have been better, things have been worse. People were violent, people were less violent, people were fair, people were less fair, people were rational, people were empirical, people were ideological. It's just been all over the place. People have been people. And that's really, it's amazing that the political divide and left versus right and all these things where all you need to do to just shatter any of the argument is that it's like oh, this one's worse than the other one, or this one's better than the other. Maybe they both have their good and they both have their bad. You know what I mean? Maybe they both have their usefulness and they both have their destructiveness. And that's really, at the end of the day, so then what can you do? Well, unfortunately, selfishly, or fortunately, or really just practically, what you could do is what's best for you. What's best for your family, what's best for your community, what's best for the long term, if you have children, what's best for the things that you care about. And that's really all you can do. So I hope you enjoyed that video. If you want me to do more videos like this where I react to incredible videos that I would never have the patience or time to produce, like the channel, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and thanks for watching. Have a good one.